Hi, everyone. Welcome to another session of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. And today, I know you've heard me say it, but this one, I really mean it. We have an amazing guest today, Christian De La Huerta, and he is an author. He is an acclaimed speaker. I mean, you want to talk about having a TEDx talk? This is the guy that you need to really go and check out. Christian, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Lori, for having me on the show. I'm really honored, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So I had the privilege of reading your book. And I have to tell you, as a person who loves personal development and really just being the best version of myself every day, this spoke to my soul. And ironically enough, it's called Awakening the Soul of Power. So before we get into the book, which is so fantastic and everybody really needs a copy, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and how you got to writing this book.
That's a good question because I'm really an unlikely person to be speaking about personal empowerment and what it means to live heroically. My adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies. And flash forward to today, it's like no matter what happens in my life, no matter the details or the circumstances, whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, a project succeeds or it fails, never, ever do I question my sense of self. My self-worth is established and unshakable. And so I know that this journey that I share in the book, this possibility of transformation that is available to any one of us. I know it works. I know that it's possible to free ourselves from whatever it is that happened in our past and to heal ourselves from any past trauma or any of life's curveballs and to overcome and transcend anything in our lives.
Yeah, and you exemplify that in your book. You know, the start of this book is really about your childhood and your lessons that you've gone through that. And so I love the fact that you took, really unfortunate circumstances and you became empowered. Like you said, a lot of people would fall, and you actually had the opposite. And so part of what you get into in the book is you talk about the ego, and I love how you've described that so eloquently. I would love to hear about you, and when was that moment for you when you recognized, one, I needed to make a change, and then what was one of the first things that you did in order to do that?
I think there were many steps along the way, but I think the one that like finally got me there, like that I was able to transcend all the stuff from childhood. I think it must have been breath work. And again, there were many steps along the way that on that process of liberating myself, and like certainly shaking the constraints of the religion in which I was raised, that told me that I was going to burn in hell for eternity. That was definitely a step, and then that began a process of like, well, if I'm not going to go by that, to decide and to choose for myself what's right and what's wrong, then how do I do that? So it was a tough and nothing short of heroic journey, which many of us go through. I think for me, maybe because of the fact that I was gay and raised in a very Catholic environment, that I had to do that early on, like many of the other people. But I think in terms of the final healing, I think it was breath work. And that was probably around age 29, 28, 29, 30, somewhere around there.
And you mentioned that as one of the pillars, breath work as one of the pillars to, healing yourself and also transcending is the word that I would love to use around that. So how did you become aware of that? Was it something that came naturally to you? Did you have a mentor that you worked with?
Yeah, I definitely had a mentor. I learned the practice from a woman. And I got to tell you, Lori, my degrees in psychology, I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist. So I come out of that psychotherapy tradition. And with all due respect, when I discovered breath work, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly at so many levels. It's just like my first session changed my life. like when I never look back, and I've been offering breathwork as a facilitator all over the world for the last 30 years.
I love that. I love that. It's like you found your calling, right? Or it found you, right?
Yeah. I found one of the tools. I think my calling was always there.
Yeah.
It just showed up in different ways. Like when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a priest. And I think part of it was a genuine, what they call a vocation, like a genuine desire to serve God as I understood it then, to make a difference in real human lives. But as I said, I was struggling in how to reconcile who I was in this religion in which I was raised, which did not have space and room for me. And so I think that calling, which, it's like, I know these days, like that, like when I think of what a priest is or a priestess, the role of that role is to help people reconnect with the sacred. And I know without any doubt that I'm fulfilling that role these days. And I don't need anybody, any organization to validate that for me. It's like, I know that I do that. So I think it's the same calling that just began to show up and manifest itself in different ways at different points in my life.
I love that. I love that. And you're absolutely correct. We talk every now and again, we'll go into spirituality and religion and that on this show. And one of the things that I'm a firm believer of is that, it's within us. You don't have to physically go somewhere to be a follower of something, that's all my personal view. And so I kind of feel I can really support what you're saying. Like, I love that you recognize that what you wanted to do as a child is ultimately what you're doing now as an adult. And it's just really just profoundly helping people, like being of service, being a servant leader, which is what you truly are. One of the things that I absolutely love in this book is how you call everyone a hero, how we're our own hero, and how we can awaken our own power by doing part of what you've talked about already: breath work, meditation, mindful observation. Talk to us a little bit about maybe give us some examples about how you have seen this and seen people truly transcend with just searching within, right? Our audience is one of those that we have gone through a lot of trauma, right? Going through, whether it's a divorce, whether it's cancer, whether it's, anything that shifts your life in such a dramatic way. I mean, also, you mentioned, there's a lot of people who are still not willing to be their true selves sexually, right? In their sexuality. And it is so difficult when you finally are confronted and you just know there's no turning back. Like whether it's the words that, you have cancer. And it has us go down this path. One, you recognize you can no longer be the same, right? You can't ever go back. And there's some work and some trauma that goes along with it. So would you have an example that you would like to share of someone who has embraced this work, who has worked with you, maybe a testimonial that you might have, and how these three pillars, meditation, breath work, and self-observation, really work for people?
Yeah, I have so many examples. I mean, I've been doing this work for over 30 years. But let me say this, because I really wanted to, I really feel honored to be here in this show with you and speaking to your audience. It's like I hesitate to say that I've had cancer, because I've been diagnosed twice with skin cancer, but it was just nothing, right? It was nothing to worry about. At least it hasn't, and that comes from a lifetime of being in the sun. I'm Cuban originally, and so born in an island and always lived by the ocean. My family relocated to Miami. Then I've lived in Hawaii, California, so always by the ocean. But here's the thing, because I really want to speak to all the warriors and the survivors of whatever it is that we've had to overcome, because life is not for wimps. Life is tough. And some of us have had to face and overcome some really challenging stuff. And it's really easy to get sucked into the poor me, into that victim mindset. If only that hadn't happened, that disease or that divorce or whatever that was, that trauma, that accident, anything, right? Whatever it was in our case, if only mom hadn't been this way, or dad hadn't done that, or the teacher or the minister, or society, if only if it hadn't been for sexism or misogyny or homophobia or racism, if only. The thing about that if only is that as long as we're holding someone or something outside of ourselves responsible for our state of being, we just give our power away. We just give it away. And so, yes, it sucked that whatever happened, and I wish it hadn't. And here's the way that we can reframe it, that pops us out of that victim mindset. Like, no matter what happened in the past, no matter what happens going forward, because if there's one thing that we can count on, is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way. Stuff is going to happen that we just are not going to see coming. Right? But no matter what happened, no matter what happens, we can always choose how we show up in response to that. And that alone, that reframe, pops us out of that victim, disempowering, poor me mindset. And it's nothing less than heroic. I mean, that's one of the ways in which I talk about all of us being heroic. Because we've had this limiting way of thinking about heroism. Most of us thought of, we heard that word hero, we thought of a superhero in a cape, or that 3-point landing, or maybe a warrior or first responder, or firefighter, or something like that. And then COVID, the pandemic actually supported us to expand how we think of heroism. So now we include our medical practitioners, our doctors, our nurses, our respiratory therapists who literally put their lives at risk in order to save ours, so many of our lives. And we even include like grocery store clerks, delivery people, migrant farm workers, who literally made so many sacrifices to keep the rest of us fed and society going. And what about the rest of us? So that's why this book talks about the heroism that you were talking about. Like, we all have that potential inside of us. And to overcome some of the stuff that many of us have had to overcome is nothing short of heroic. And to live life in the way that I put forth in this book, so rather than reacting, like that ego response, somebody does something to us and we react, and you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you right back. That is nothing short of heroic. To learn how to not take things personally, to learn how to pop ourselves out of victim mode, how to like reel in our judgments, and pull back our projections onto other people. That is nothing short of heroic. And so, yes, I mean, I have many, many examples, and if I don't want to keep on going, but I can tell you many stories of people that have been doing this work whose lives are nothing short of heroic.
Yeah, and I just love the way that you frame that, and it's so true. If 2021 has shown us anything, is that people in their own right are truly heroic beings, right? We've all had to overcome something, especially in the world of COVID right now. What would be one thing that, if you were able to share with everyone listening, like the one practice that you do daily, like you mentioned breath work, but is there another, maybe a little self-care tip or a mindset tip that it is unshakable, it's unwavering? It's like, because you said that you are strong in your conviction as to who you are as a being. How can someone start developing that?
I think the first step, Lori, is self-awareness, because there's nothing that we can do about what we're not aware of. And so much of what drives us in life, and that's having an impact on our relationships and the quality of our life, it's subconscious. It's like we're doing stuff that we don't even know why we're doing it or where it came from. So I think the first step is becoming aware of why we do the things we do. And that's heroic, right? It takes work. But it is so rewarding. Because once we become aware why we do the things we do, like Carl Jung, the psychologist, said that the process of enlightenment is making these unconscious conscious. Because once we become aware of it, then we can do something about it, whatever that is, whether we go to therapy or go to breath work or so many other healing modalities that we have access to these days. And so many sources of wisdom that we have access to just with a couple of clicks of the keyboard. But if we don't know what we're doing or why we do the things we do, that there's nothing we can do. So any practice of self-awareness. And so that's why I began the book, probably the first quarter of the book is talking about the ego, like understanding the ego mind is crucial to understanding why we do the things we do, why we get stuck in self-made prisons of fear and limitation, why we get get caught up in these power plays. So that, and we don't have time to really dive into what the ego is, but here's a simple image, a visual. If you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's the ego mind. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all who we are, and to make some really important, critical, consequential choices about our lives, about our relationships, from its very small, limited, and always fear-based perspective. So to me, that's number one, like understanding how the mind works. And then number two, I would say, like understand, clean a relationship to power, right? Because we've got such a confusing understanding about what power is. We have an ambivalent relationship to power, maybe even conflicted, right? And understandably, right? Because we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing. With quotes and teachings like power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. What they didn't tell us is that Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not personal power. Then we also fear that, I think the reason we're so afraid of power is that we fear that if we really stepped into all of who we are, like not playing small, not holding back, that other people wouldn't be able to handle it, and that we might end up rejected and alone. I think we also fear that we might abuse it. And no wonder, how many times have we witnessed abuses of power? All we got to do is turn on the news any given day to witness at least one abuse of power, not to mention the countless times we've experienced it in our own lives. And so when you put all that together into the mix, and when you add to that mix the fact that we've been conditioned to fear the emotions, we hate conflict, we avoid confrontation, what happens is that we end up giving our power away. And we end up settling for less. We end up just selling ourselves out for really lame reasons, for an illusion of security, for a false sense of acceptance, and for crumbs, morsels of pseudo love. So it's not a good strategy. And so one part of the rest of the book is about how do we step into power in a different way that's not about fear, control, force, domination, that doesn't require abuse, that doesn't require that we push anybody down or step on them in order for us to feel powerful.
Ooh, yes, yes to all of that. And what I love is that this book doesn't just end here, right? There are other books besides that. There's 2 other books outside of this one. Is that correct?
Yes, it's part of a series of 3. The series is called Calling All Heroes. Like it's time, right? This is a time for heroism. We're living in such challenging, chaotic, uncertain times. Like even probably just to be awake, be alive today, and to be willing to get up and make our beds and maintain a sense of self and equanimity and inner peace, that alone is heroic in this crazy world that we live in. So the first book is about personal empowerment. The next one is on relationships. And I'm probably about halfway done with that. So applying the teachings of the ego and empowerment to relationships, because I suspect, at least from the majority of people that I've been working with in retreats and workshops for the last 30 years, I think for most of us, that's the area where we tend to give our power away the most. Not the only area, but a lot of us, that's one of the first areas that I ask people, is in that process of becoming more self-aware, where in life do we tend to give our power away? Right? When do we tend to say yes when inside we feel no? So is it in romantic, intimate sexual relationships? Is it perhaps with authority figures, bosses, parental kind of figures, coaches, that kind of thing? Is it with family? Is it with peers, right? So that by asking ourselves that type of question, which are strewn all throughout the book, designed to make us aware of why we do the things we do, then we can start noticing the patterns. And once we notice the patterns, then we can break them and we can bring choice back into the equation.
Love it. I love it. That's exactly it. I mean, and this is why I'm in love with this book, because not only do you speak the truth, and you speak it in a way that it is so clear and so easy to understand, right? People tend to complicate things. And I love the fact that you did not do that. It's just really concise. You have the workbook along with each chapter where you give really thought-provoking, self-awareness questions for people to work on. And then what I love about what you're saying about the second book is that I love the fact that you mentioned that relationships are truly with everyone in your life. Like, everybody thinks about romantic relationships as being like relationships, but no, you're in a relationship with your mailman, right? You're in a relationship with the UPS guy, and it's all connected. How you treat those people is how you're going to treat everybody else in life.
True.
And it's one of those things that, my stand in life is every day, every interaction, leave people better than when I found them. Right. And I'm not perfect at it. There's moments of shame that I've had to deal with, of like, oh, I could have done that better, but we're human. But what I love about all of this is looking inward is ultimately what's going to give you the power to sustain a beautiful life that you can truly live fully. And that is what we are about here. We're about positive mindset. We're about empowerment. We are about, you know what, today maybe your win is making your bed, and tomorrow you might actually start training for that marathon. That's right. I love that that's exactly where this book lies, for me at least. Like, it just really embodies that.
That's so beautiful, Lori. Thank you for framing it in that way. Well, and you said it earlier, right? If the sacred, or God, whatever you want to call it, is within us, like all the answers to every question that we had is inside of us. The power is within. So that's one of the reasons we have confusion about power, because we tend to think about powerful people with, we connect them, we're associated with people who have money, people who are famous, people who are high up, have some kind of high role in a hierarchy, whether it's a corporate ladder or a religious institution. But the thing about all those expressions of power, that they're outside of us. Right. And because they're outside of us, they're fickle. They could be here today, gone tomorrow. So I talk in the book about worldly power, or ego power, which is that associated with externals. Ego power, worldly power, it always has an agenda. It's always trying to get something for itself. And it's always trying to self-aggrandize, to blow itself up, to seem bigger than it is. In contrast with what I call soulful power, or spiritual power, that authentic inner power that's inside every one of us. Nobody can give it to us. Nobody can take it away. We're the only ones who give it away for all those reasons that we were talking about earlier. And it's humble. Like, that power is humble and no less powerful. I propose it's even more powerful. So think about, like a Gandhi or a Gandalf, if you're into the Lord of the Rings, in their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet. One would never know how much power they hold until it's necessary, and then get out of the way. Right? Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point in terms of global reach, without ever shooting a gun or landing a single punch. Yeah. Power. That's power. And that's what's inside each and every one of us.
I love that. I love that, because especially for those listening who may be in a part of their journey that's been really difficult, and they might feel like, why am I even bothering going to this next treatment? Or why am I even, I hate to say it, but why am I even living, right? You get to a point where you get really low as part of this whole process. And it's not something that ever really leaves us. Like we have to work to really develop that mindset of like, everything's going to be okay. Take one day at a time, 1 second at a time, if you have to. And so you saying that, you know, giving that example of Gandhi, who was able to really change the world, right? With no force,
No
just
force.
his being, really, for me, just gives hope to so many people who are just dealing with whatever it is that they're dealing with.
Only soul force, which
Yeah.
is, you know, which we all have.
Yeah, I love that.
We all have that. It's just a matter of getting rid of all the conditioning, all the fears, all the BS that we've allowed to hold us back from being who we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. Forget about looking bad and all of that. I love it. You are speaking to my soul right now. It's just the most amazing conversation. So I would also love to hear a little bit about what you do. So clearly you're an amazing author. And you also a speaker. You mentioned that you do some workshops. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you provide.
Yeah, you know, I've been doing retreats and workshops for the last 30 something years, 32 years, I think it is now. And you know, using breath work as a healing modality. To me, the writing is like, yeah, I know I write well, but it's not natural to me. Like for me, it's a means to an end. For me, it's work. You know, some people that I know just love to write and they get lost in it and to do their morning pages and all that kind of stuff. For me, it's I have a way with words. I know that. And because English is a second language, I had to learn the rules of how to write. So I know that was really helpful. But it's work. For me, it's work. For me, it's a means to an end. It's a way to get the message out there and to reach as many people as possible. But for me, the real work happens in the retreat because it's a combination of the teachings, the concepts that are shared in the book, and to highlight what you also brought up, which is those power practices at the end of every chapter. I really support the reader to take the time to do them. Like there's no rush to go through the book. I'd rather that the chapters are designed, you know, short by intention, so that because I know how busy and how overextended we all are. So if you take just a short chapter a week, but take a few minutes, and it doesn't even require that you write it down, just live in the questions that week. It'll be life-changing because that's how we make that subconscious conscious. That's how we begin to do, you know, the self-awareness and support the self-awareness, which is the first step so that we can get to self-acceptance, which then makes self-love possible. But it only makes that, so that's that journey from self-hatred and self-doubt to self-love and self-acceptance and self-empowerment. And if any, you know, once we're able to do retreats again and live events, then by all means, I'll go back to doing them. And I've been doing, you know, I take people, you know, week-long retreats to beautiful places in the world, taking groups to Peru, Machu Picchu, and Hawaii frequently, and southern France, Egypt, all places that have like a spiritual meaning or vibe to them. And of course, I'll go back to doing that. What I am doing now, though, which kind of COVID forced my hand, you know, without minimizing the tragedy of COVID, for me, it was a blessing. I went from doing 100,000 miles on an airplane to zero. And also zero income, right? Like no retreats, no workshops. And so it forced my hand, and I had to develop, I mean, I was able to finish writing the book that I've been brewing inside of my head for, you know, probably 10 years. And COVID like sat my butt down, and I gave me the opportunity to just get it out of my head and onto the page. The other thing that it did, I had to pivot like so many other people do and create what I've known for years I needed to do, which create virtual online programming if I was going to reach people all over the world who may never come to one of my retreats. And so, yes, I love the retreats, and they're amazing because I can combine the teachings with the breath work, which is a really powerful combination. And what the year-long coaching program that I've created allows me to do is to stretch out the teachings, like spread them out over the course of a year, deliver it piecemeal, just like the book does, a little bit each week, a little bit of content each week with two things that are different. That I can't do in a weekend retreat, right? Interactivity. So that's where those power practices come in that are designed to integrate the teachings so that they don't stay at the level of information. We don't need more information. We've got information overload. What we need is transformation. And that comes from applying the teachings to our lives. So that, and then the year-long allows me to put in a system of accountability, right? It's so easy to get distracted by life. We live in such an ADD society. There's so many things pulling for our time and our attention. So a system of accountability, meaning keeping us doing what we said we were going to do, so that we can achieve the dreams and the goals and the intentions that we really long for. And so the coaching, the system has biweekly coaching calls with me, and then we have other systems to keep people accountable. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that part of it.
And we are so grateful that you've created that amazing online forum for people to come and to be able to work with you, right? I mean, it's kind of like a blessing, like you said. The retreats are amazing, and I can't wait for you to start them because I'm going to be first in line. But also to be able to, like, it has also expanded your reach. You know, that people that like you mentioned, that may not have been able to travel with you are now able to get your offerings. So I absolutely love that. And so that is a really great way to ask you, segue into saying, how can people find you?
Yeah, and I'm almost done with a shorter program. I'm not sure if it's going to be 5 or 6 weeks. I'm still working on it, but for people who can't commit, to a year long, or are not willing to commit to a whole year experience, which, I'm so convinced about the effectiveness of it, is that I guarantee it. Like if you show up, and if you do the homework, and if you do the readings, the transformation is guaranteed. There is no way that transformation wouldn't happen. Right. But still people who maybe won't be able to afford what it is, and I'm keeping it accessible. My business coach wants me to be charging a lot more than I'm actually charging, which is about.
They always do.
They do. But I want to keep it accessible, and that's why I'm also creating this shorter, more accessible program for people who don't have the time or the inclination to commit to a whole year.
Great.
So in terms of how to reach me, the book is accessible wherever books are sold. So you can get it at your local bookstore if you order it, or you can get it on Amazon or any of the online bookstores. In terms of reaching me, probably the best way is my website, soulfulpower.com. And from there, they can reach all my social media. And for your audience, Lori, if they go to soulfulpower.com and get on my email list, which is easy, right? If you don't like it down the road, just click on subscribe. One click and you're out of it. But for anybody who gets on my email list, we'll send them a chapter from the book, the one that talks about what it means to live heroically in the 21st century. We'll send them some of the power practices that you and I have been talking about, and a recorded teaching and guided meditation about trust, which I created last year in the midst of the pandemic to help us navigate these crazy, chaotic times of fear and uncertainty. So how do we move into trust in these times?
Oh, that is so good. So good. I mean, trust is we could have a whole other hour-long conversation about trust. I love that you have that available, and we are so grateful for you sharing yourself with us, for your gifts that you're providing to the listeners. And you truly are an amazing soul. And I am looking forward to seeing where you end up, because this is definitely just the beginning for you.
Well,
even though you've been around for 30 years, like I know that, but you know what I mean.
I totally know what you mean. And thank you so much for saying that. And it takes one to know one, right? And so thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. And thank you for having the show. I know that in your willingness, and I would guess courage to do so, that many, many lives are being touched and helped and supported and impacted. So thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here.